Hello and welcome to another episode of the Mastermind, Body, and Spirit Show. I'm your host, Matt Belair. Today's guest is a visionary teacher, innovator, and founder of the pioneering Academy of Inner Science, which promotes the study of the principles of mysticism and human inner development. Originally a student of medicine and science, he took a radical departure into the exploration of mysticism, including a 4-year meditation retreat. For the past 15 years, he has dedicated himself to the systematic exploration of mysticism, gaining insights into how mystical knowledge can help fill in the gaps in science. Founded in 2008, the Academy of Inner Science is a unique institution with a distinctive approach to exploring consciousness, evolution, and the junctures between mysticism and science. He has worked with tens of thousands of people worldwide in his workshops, retreats, and multi-year study programs, and has collaborated with luminaries in related fields, such as philosopher Ken Wilber and 3-time Nobel Prize nominee Scilla Elworthy. Welcome to the show, Thomas Huebel.
Thank
What's up,
you.
Thomas?
Hey.
How did I do on the last name?
Very good, very good.
Oh.
So you're learning German. It's a for free German class.
Yeah, slow progress. Well, I'm excited to talk to you. I was introduced to you by some of your team that listened to the podcast, and I got to look at your work, and you've been doing a tremendous amount of work for a long time. I'm really excited to dive into all the amazing things you're doing. So why don't you just start with wherever you want, like a little bit of background on how you got to where you are today. There's a lot of things that I'm curious about, but we can kind of go wherever you want.
Right. I mean, you said some things. I mean, let's start. Like when I was 19, I felt a very strong calling to meditate, and I did it every day from that day on, and it really gave me some. Like I started to study medicine, went to med school at that time, and it somehow gave me like a very good inner space, let's say. And then when I was 26, then I left my studies, and I had such a strong feeling in order to find really kind of my path, I need a kind of a timeout. And then at the end, I didn't know that it's going to be 4 years at that time, but eventually I ended up 4 years meditating a lot, like really a lot. And I kind of explored like levels of human consciousness. And it was a very important time. Of course, my family at the beginning, as many people were concerned about my departure. And every time somebody asked me, well, what are you doing? I mean, just sitting around. And I said, yeah, but I'm studying. It's kind of a different kind of studying. And eventually I had a very big opening experience at the end of these 4 years. And then I came back to Vienna, and I just basically sat for another year in an apartment, meditated a lot, and saw a few people. And then like another spiritual teacher came to town, and one lady that saw me kind of invited me. And so that teacher, Paulo, kind of saw me, and he said some things about me, and then people invited me to give workshops. And then my life changed radically from being completely silent and quiet and kind of very laid back. I started to travel just with a suitcase and a computer bag for 4 years. Like I had other very different 4 years. I traveled all around the world, worked with many people, and gave lots of retreats. And learned a lot how to. It's kind of it was the in a way another study time, but in kind of to ground my experience of these 4 years in the world. And then after some time, I thought, so now it's time to develop this academy. I wanted to work on a much more committed base, and find a way how to bring the two sides that really kind of I feel passionate about, which is science and also the inner science, as I call it, like the core of the wisdom traditions, which is for me the mystical work is the true awake consciousness within the wisdom traditions. And so, and then we said, okay, and in the meanwhile, now it's 2018, and now we have already, with 6 universities, we're doing PhD programs on for people that have a deep inner practice, and they want to kind of combine their PhD and scientific research with kind of inner development, neuroscience, psychology, social studies. We do a lot of stuff on collective trauma, which became, in a way, my kind of one of my main research topics, because I think that the next level of understanding health is in that which we all have been born into, which is a kind of the collective trauma field, and you find it all over the world. And my wife and I, we co-founded 2 years ago, like a non-profit organization. It's called the Pocket Project. And so now we are doing worldwide. We have people from many countries around the world working on what is collective trauma, how does it affect us, what are new ways how we can work on a much larger scale with trauma fields than one-on-one setups. So that's a kind of a fast forward movement throughout the last 15 years or 20 years, basically.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. Yeah. And okay, so you've done the 4-year meditation. You continue to meditate, but you've got a science background. And then so you start to explore mysticism, ancient traditions, and you've basically been putting those two together. And you also have a festival coming up that you've just decided to put together. Like what was the reasoning for putting that? What do you hope to bring forward? It's more of the collective trauma idea.
Yeah. So first of all, that festival, we did 14 of them already in Germany.
Oh, wow.
It exists. Yeah. Celebrate Life exists. We did 14 festivals in Germany, and now it's the first year that we bring it to the US. Last year we had around 1,400 participants. It's kind of a big festival. We always choose a different topic. People from all over the world come. We invite speakers, like good speakers that I really trust or appreciate their work. And then we explore different topics. And this year it's about fragmentation, how we see cultural fragmentation, how we deal with our own inner fragmentation, how we project this outwards. And we see lots of polarization right now in the world. And I think that's like from the personal to the collective development, that's a very important topic. So because in our own inner fractures, we tend to project a lot of stuff onto other people, onto governments, onto society, onto also in kind of racial questions. And so we want to have a look at this whole topic. And also one day we will dedicate 1.5 days to explore what is the collective trauma layer in the US, and how can we learn more about it, and how does it affect us individually and culturally. And so Celebrate Life is always cool because it brings people it's a kind of a co-creation of many culturally creative people that have a kind of a spiritual practice, that are interested in their own growth and development as human beings, and they also want to make a contribution. So how do we use our spiritual practice not to kind of bypass our worldly difficulties, but how can we make it our kind of resource or power in really being in the world? So that's our kind of topic basically this year. Yeah, and there will be artists and other speakers and a whole community event. Yeah.
That's amazing. Well, I'm a huge festival fan myself, so if I can make it, I'll definitely show up. And
yeah, you're welcome.
Where is it?
At Omega.
Omega,
upstate New York. Yeah, the Omega Center.
All right. Yeah. If I can make it, I'll be there. Well, when I go to the festivals with my friends, a lot of people will see, they think it's like a drug culture or whatever the case is. And although that can be a part of it, the way that I see transformational festivals is there's a lot of consciousness, a lot of workshops, a lot of speakers, and there's a lot of intentional thinking, brainstorming, collaboration. And so, I'm a huge fan of it myself. So I'm glad you're bringing it here to explore, because those topics and those speakers are really important for us to talk about a lot of these things that we're not talking about. Do you want to go into a little bit, which I'm curious about, is like, what is some of your timeless wisdom training? Like these, when you're going into mysticism and things, what did you bring out of that the everyday person can start to apply to their lives to start to get some of these benefits? And then maybe if you want to go into how they merge with science, you can go for that too.
Right. So mysticism, again, let's define mysticism, because mysticism is a word where many people might have different associations with. And when I talk about mysticisms, I'm talking about the big wisdom traditions like Judaism or Buddhism or Taoism or Islam or, you know, Christianity. They're a religious framework, but within that religious framework, there is a kind of there are some people that really have some deep consciousness insights. And I think the writings, it's like a cable through space-time. So there are 5,000 years of a tradition, and inside, from master to student, there was a kind of an awake consciousness. And then there are lots of interpretations. So usually people argue and even create wars around the interpretations. But inside there is something completely different. There was the original message is actually very beautiful and actually very similar in all the big traditions. So I believe that the real masters of the different traditions, they don't argue because they realize like similar layers of consciousness. And there are descriptions, and there's a lot of knowledge about human development. And so when we look at science, like medicine, psychology, so we also have a lot of scientific knowledge about human development, childhood development, attachment processes, trauma. And I believe bringing those two together and having them have a dialogue, like what can we find out together, I think is a very interesting process. And I believe deeply that when we harvest, because there were very serious people that gave their whole lives to explore, like it's even a scientific exploration to explore life through a contemplative path. And so there are other scientific experiments that are standardized in outer science, as we call it. And so when we bring those two together, not to convince each other, to have a dialogue with each other, and to find out what are similarities, how can we learn from each other, and how can we develop something together that is meaningful for humanity and for cultural evolution. And so when we listen to the traditions, I mean, thousands of years of people having deep insights and writing them down. So we have lots of maps and kind of a lot of knowledge how human consciousness is composed or being created. And so when we bring this together, for example, with trauma knowledge, with education, with childhood development, I think there's a very rich conversation that we can have. And so we are facilitating that conversation. And and so when we see, for example, when we as grown-ups, we like life is flowing through us. And when we say life is sacred, it means that the innermost aspect of life holds a lot of, it has been passed on over thousands of years. When you look just your parents and your grandparents and your great-grandparents, you're standing on a huge tree of life. And that's why I think that sometimes we think of our bodies, for example, as oh, it's my body, it's kind of 20, 30, 40, 50, whatever years old. And I'd say, no, your body is hundreds of thousands of years old. You know, in your body, it's a refined biocomputer that life worked on for a very long time. Our nervous systems are very, very refined. You know, many, many lifetimes led up to us having this conversation. And so many structures, from being like a cell up to plants and animals and humans, and like the whole evolution is sitting here and having this conversation. And so I believe a lot of the mystical practice was to uncover that our nervous systems and our bodies and our consciousness is much more refined than we often think. and we are often lacking is, I don't know, I didn't have, when I went to school, high school and university, I didn't have kind of mystical teachers that told me about the amazing capacities that my nervous system has. So I needed to find out by myself. I needed to read many books, go to workshops, you know, have a 4-year meditation retreat to satisfy the kind of my spiritual intelligence. And so I think there are many kids in our education system. It's much easier to go to a baseball or basketball club than to have a kind of a spiritual enrichment, or kind of a people that can teach us. And so, and it's just for the kids that are interested, but the ones that are interested need some food in order to grow their capacities. And so that's in a way what we are also doing, that we look, okay, what is the knowledge that the mystical and the wisdom traditions hold for us, and how can we apply it in education? So a friend of mine started in Germany. He was the head of a university, and he started with the government in Germany, like education programs, and also as a civil society movement, a whole new wave of education, like potential-based education, to go from knowledge-based education to potential-based education. And also in the whole healing work, there's a lot of knowledge about healing, how like intelligence and information flows through our body, and what happens if it's blocked, and what happens if it's stuck or traumatized. And so there are many, and also how social societies are basically agreements on certain values, and those values are sometimes conscious values, but those values are also sometimes trauma values. They are not conscious structures, they are unconscious structures. And then because we have been born into all of it, you know, we have learned, oh, that's normal, and until we find out maybe it's not normal. Maybe, for example, if somebody says, oh, I'm afraid to take an exam at the university, and then another person says, oh yeah, I also know the fear. When I had exams, I also was afraid. So we make it normal. And I'd say the fear that you feel has nothing to do with your exam. The fear that you feel has something to do with your past. So the past that we carry often overshadows our current experience, and then we make it about this experience. And so that can become easily a normal structure. Or for example, strangers. People might say, oh, a person that I don't know is a stranger. And another person says, yes, I also know strangers. So a stranger becomes a kind of, as if that was something real. In fact, the stranger, it doesn't happen out there. It's not a person that I don't know. It's a kind of an evolutionary process in me. I project that onto you, and I look at you with more distance, more careful, like until we get to know each other. What is the process of getting to know each other? What is that? So I think if we examine it, we say, oh yeah, I go through a whole cascade of feelings and body sensations and thoughts until, you know, many of my close friends, they were strangers one day, and now they are my closest friends. Why? Well, what happened from being a stranger to being a friend? And I think if we examine the things in our society that we take for granted as if they were givens, like this is the way it is, we find out many things that are not just normal. And some of it, I believe, are trauma agreements. And those trauma agreements are actually not supporting health. They're not supporting expression. They're not supporting like a joyful co-creativity. They're actually often limiting factors. And that's why I deeply think that this whole unseen collective trauma layer is like a ghost in the machine. And we see now, for example, like humanity is responding way too slowly to climate change. So the individual or the culture is not able to respond appropriately to the environmental challenge. And I believe one part of it is that the trauma doesn't want to change. Trauma is afraid to change. And that's why we simply create a delay, and usually those delays create more of the same. So yeah, these are just a few things. I mean, I could go on for hours now. These are just a few.
Perfect. Well, as you're sharing that, I was kind of writing down a lot of questions, and all of that is fantastic. I definitely agree. I was curious about, let's say somebody is walking the path of, say, spiritual intelligence, and I like that term. There's a lot out there. It can get confusing. Do I meditate? Is it chakras? Is it crystals? Is it aliens? Is it channeling? We get a little bit lost. And I think that it's really beautiful when you think about how you would teach this to a kid, because then it has to be honest. You know what I mean? When you're teaching it to a kid and you care about that individual, it has to be an honest teaching. So I was just curious from your research, what have you noticed around maybe principles or belief systems or structures that you share and try to empower people with? Maybe it's like the Eightfold Path of Buddhism, which I really like. It's clear, defined structure. Or these people that you're around working with, like Ken Wilber and the Nobel Prize nominee. What do you see in their character and their habits that you would empower either the youth with or an individual so they can start walking the path and have some principles and ideas to begin exploring?
Yeah, I think the best teaching for me is kind of a mutual inquiry. So which means is that we're not conveying belief systems. We are looking, okay, in an as you said, a very honest inquiry. What do we find out together? And so usually, like, the spiritual practice has, I believe, two, well, multiple things, but let's say talk about two. One is it brings you closer to yourself. So which means it's something that creates intimacy between you and yourself first, like your healthy self connection. But through that, it connects you through you to the depth of who you are. So which means through presencing, through mindfulness practices, through inner connection, through also integration processes, we feel ourselves again more, because often the fragmentation is that our mental activity, our emotional and physical activity are not anymore aligned. They're often kind of fragmented. So that our mind sometimes racing, we think, should I do this or that, which often means I don't feel my life anymore. And so if we, when we integrate ourselves inside, so we come back more and more to our authentic rhythm, to a healthy feeling of ourselves. I mean, there's so many books about nutrition, but many of them just say that we don't feel what we need to eat. So that we start to be disconnected from our bodies. And especially in a time where kind of scientific work, studying technology, big cities, like, there are many temptations to actually help us to get more disembodied. And one practice is to actually become more embodied. So that's one thing. Then another sign for a healthy spirituality is that it doesn't take us out of life, except you want to go into a cave. So there are people that really want to study in the Himalayan mountains, and for them it's good. But for most of us, we live in culture. So the spiritual practice should actually equip us with more capacities to face our lives and to make a meaningful contribution to life. And so that every one of us is being supported by a healthy community in our highest expression. So that I'm interested in your highest expression and you are interested in my highest expression, is that we create a culture that is potential oriented, that is open to inquire, that doesn't have pre-formed fixed ideas, but is open-minded and has the willingness to find out in order to, oh, that's how it is, or to be right. And also, at the same time, if we want to practice something, like, you wouldn't want to have your neighbor find a knife in the kitchen and say, okay, from today on, I'm a surgeon. No, you're not a surgeon and you're not going to do operations. If you want to become a surgeon, so you study medicine, you learn it, and after 20 years, maybe you're going to be a great surgeon. And in the spiritual practice, it's a bit like that also, that we take meditation, contemplation, prayer. They're deep practices, and it's not just you do half a year of meditation, going to be enlightened. Maybe that happens for one or two people, but for most of us, it's a deepening practice. It makes our life deeper, more connected, embracing more of life, being more of an inherent part of life. And also, I often say our deepest humanity is our highest possibility. It also makes us more open and vulnerable, kind of open-hearted human beings. And so when the combination of becoming more and more open and kind of engaged in the world, and I like the English term responsibility, like the ability to respond to our life, basically, to ourselves and to our environment. And the kind of and that ability to respond naturally creates responsibility, which also means for many of us, we become parents, that parenting and providing for the next generation a responsible like circumstance, and to practice in intimate relationship, to practice at work, so that all our life actually becomes part of a more conscious way of living. And so when we are more connected, and then from that healthy base, we can also explore like higher, more transpersonal layers of consciousness that are not so common. And they need sometimes also kind of protected spaces where we can practice, like retreats or like places where we can go deep. And we also have the time to go deep without being disturbed in our daily life. So I think a good combination is good, but I think a good sign for a healthy spiritual practice is that it makes us become more loving, compassionate, and clear human beings that are less afraid to be in life and that are more engaged. And that's why we also naturally take care of the challenges and the issues that come along our path. And I simply believe if every one of us takes care just of the issues that we meet in life, then all together we are like an orchestra. But if many people don't take their challenges in life on, it stays with a few, and then the whole system gets out of balance. And so, I mean, these are a few components maybe about spiritual practice that I think are healthy signs. The unhealthy signs would be that we just need to be more conscious people, because all the unconscious people, they disturb us, and that I cannot have any noise, and everything needs to be quiet, and like so that I pull away from life more and more, and that's a sign actually that that's not a valid practice for people that live in culture. And because of the fact that we imported some practices, especially from the Far East, I mean, there are many very good practices, but some of them have been designed for monasteries. Some of them have been designed for yogis in the Himalayan mountains. And we cannot just take them and apply them because they make us more airy. They support, actually, if we don't have a good practice to integrate our shadows as well, then we feel more and more imbalanced in our life. And I think that's an unhealthy sign when we practice spiritual practice. So how can it be integrated into our life without losing its power? Yeah.
Awesome. I love all that. I totally agree. And I like how it's really grounded, it's practical, it's simple, and it's finding your own path, doing your own work, and taking the responsibility with yourself. So I wanted to ask, because we've touched on this a little bit, I think that a lot of people are unconscious of, you say, like the collective trauma or something, or even, for example, Plato's cave is such an amazing analogy, where these cave people are chained to a wall, but there's shadows on the wall, and they believe them to be real. And I think that is a way to interpret the collective shadow, where if you can think of it as like your sports team, if you grow up in Los Angeles, you probably like the Lakers. If you grow up in New York, you probably like the Dodgers, or, the Yankees, or whatever the case is. And so that's kind of like your unconscious thing that's conscious, coming from family, community, and the collective around you. And then we could scale out to planetary collective. And this, if we scale out to planetary collective and you take a look at it, it's like, holy crap, a lot of people are getting shot right in the face. And this has been happening for a long time. We have just been murdering each other. Our human history is terrible. And, I've kind of said it like at Burning Man a couple of times. I really like scale out there. It's like, if ETs came here, they would stay in their ships they would not come down. They'd be like, oh my God, look at that. They got these advanced weapons. They even got teams of people. You'd be like, yo, Doug, they've got teams of people that will work as a unit to mess you up. And like it's gnarly. And so I think that a lot of this stuff that we're not even consciously aware of is affecting us, right? And how we treat our neighbors, how we interact at the grocery store, how inspired we are to step out and communicate about these things. If you're in certain parts of the world and you talk about meditation or consciousness or spiritual practices, you're woo-woo weirdo. And so I guess I would ask you, how would you recommend somebody going through their own process, kind of being able to identify some of this either collective trauma or say family trauma or just personal direct trauma, going through that, and what would you recommend or like to see in an ideal world for healing a global humanity and ultimately coming to a space where we are a peaceful planet, we do respect each other, we live in a world that makes sense, and we collaborate and it's peaceful and people aren't dying and there's no weapons that kill each other by the masses.
Yeah, beautiful. First of all, I like your deep thoughts, and I'm happy that you're thinking about all of this. It's great. I love it. And yeah, I think, the easier part, the not easier part in the experience, but the easier part to relate to is if something traumatizing happened in my own life, because then I have a kind of an address in myself. I can say, oh, with 5 years, or I got bullied at school or whatever, but I have a kind of a location. But last year's festival, I invited a speaker. She is a professor for epigenetics, and she already has, she has proven already that traumatized mice pass on through sperm cells like epigenetic changes that create the same symptoms in the following generation. So if you follow it 5 generations, you have the same symptoms. If you don't treat the mice like with a kind of therapy, they will have the same symptoms, the same trauma symptoms, although they didn't have any kind of attachment trauma in their own life. So this means, and there's more and more research coming out recently that says that there are epigenetic changes. So when we get traumatized, so we pass part of this trauma, not only through psychological and social and family environments onto our kids, but also literally through the body. It's in every cell of our body. And that also means that, first of all, I might have symptoms in my life, like anxieties or psychological imbalances or physical symptoms that I cannot relate directly to an event in my life. And then we might be confused and say, yeah, but I didn't have such a strong trauma in my life. Yeah, but it also doesn't have to be, because these predispositions are being passed on. It's like waves throughout the generations, trauma waves through space-time. And so that's one thing. And the other thing, because I worked a lot in Europe and also in Germany, and I currently live in Israel. So through my early work in Germany, I got exposed to some kind of eruptions that happened in my groups, where collective trauma material suddenly came up in many people. So suddenly 30, 40 people started to cry, and they saw terrible images from the Second World War, the Holocaust. And after it happened again and again and again, I started to research this. I said, oh, life's telling me something here that I need to look at this. And then I more and more learned a lot about it. I did some big events for collective trauma integration before we founded this non-profit association. And I learned a lot about this dynamic. So I did many groups with collective trauma work, and in order to understand and also learn more about the dynamics. And what I have seen is that there is, like, it's for me, it looks like a lake underneath our culture, our cities. There's a lot of information, unconscious information, like the Holocaust. Like when we go into the spiritual traditions, for example, there's a word karma. Many people use the word karma, but what does karma mean? Karma means kind of a postponing of experience, which means if I experience something, let's say we get into an argument now here online, and we really start a fight. And then we turn off our computers, and then you're kind of pissed, I'm pissed, and I walk around for half an hour. I need to go to my group, but I'm not fully present with my group because I am still thinking about you and how could you say this and blah, blah. And so the time that it takes to digest that experience is in a way what I call after time. It's the time that it takes to digest what couldn't be solved here online between us. And many people, when they have a relationship fight, when they go to work, they spend maybe half a day thinking about their partner, not about their work. So their processor, their inner processor is not really present in where they are. We are not present with the circumstances. We are kind of disturbed. So that's what I call a carry-on luggage. You take a carry-on luggage from one plane to another. And so from one moment I take energy, and the Zen, the Enzo, the Zen circle, is like energy needs to fulfill itself in order to return into peace. So that's true for every moment, but it's also true for something like the Holocaust. It's a huge impact onto humanity. And that's not just half an hour, that's generations being busy with digesting an experience of a few years that has an amazing impact on millions of people suffering. So if we were to show the after effects of wars, it's not just what happens in that period is terrible, but if you see what it generates, like now, the war in Syria, there's so many atrocities that will keep humanity busy for generations. It will take us generations to digest the after effects and the damage that has been created. And I think if we see that, then we see the magnitude of war and how it impacts many, many generations of suffering, of all kinds of imbalances and difficulties that we often call individual problems, but they are not that individual. They go back into a whole net of trauma, as you said, that over thousands of years we did this stuff. We tortured each other, we killed each other, like many terrible things. And that's why I think we learned in the last 150 years after Freud, we learned a lot about individual psychology, individual process work. We learned a lot about trauma. And I believe now we are kind of on a threshold to expand our collective capacities, like that we can develop tools for much bigger chunks of it and learn how to work with it through large group processes. Because of the internet, we are much more connected. I mean, just that we can have this conversation now has a huge technology base in the background. And that very technology is kind of an externalized brain. And that externalized brain gives us a reflection, a capacity to reflect ourselves. When you hear what people say about AI, you can see it's like AI is kind of the alien that we needed that can land on the planet, as you said. Something landed here, and then we have suddenly another. And what humans usually do when there is another, we project a lot of stuff onto it. So all the terrible things that AI can do to us is all the terrible things that we did to ourselves or to others, like to animals, to plants, to ourselves as humanity. So we project all our evil nature onto AI, and then we are afraid of it. But that's a classical, like every psychologist with a client would say, okay, let's have a look at this. So if we are clever now, we can take this projection back to us and we can really learn something about humanity's nature. And then maybe we would also develop technologies out of a different motivation because it comes from a much cleaner motivation and we wouldn't need to go through a traumatic cycle. And I believe, as you said, that the collective trauma field, because it's unconscious, we often experience it either through symptoms, irritations, or outward projections. And that can help us to learn to work with it, to say, wow, for example, I had recently a very strong collective trauma process on colonialism, and it's amazing how much pain and in certain parts of the world is still stored around colonialism. part of our wealth in the West is built on blood and pain. And that's something that will need to balance itself in a global world. I mean, as long as we could put it there, wherever there was, hopefully it was far away, like same what we did with the trash, we put it somewhere. Now the toxic stuff comes closer and closer back to us, and we see there is no there anymore in a unified global world. Like now we need to take care of this world because we have not enough space anymore to dump our waste, our psychological waste, and also our real waste. And that's why I think now we are coming into kind of a crisis that forces us to really look at ourselves. And on the other hand, you see many people like us here that we are exploring how consciousness can, like a higher consciousness, a higher awareness, and a kind of an inner process work can transform us into kind of more embracing and conscious people, and that we don't have to go just through the experience of suffering in order to change. We can change voluntarily. So the other side is that many people do some consciousness work around the world, and that's also speeding up. But I think the whole tech development and the whole environmental development are two very strong change impulses that we have to go through. And I just hope that we have enough present and conscious people if times get rockier, which means that the climate change and the tech change in society, this will hugely change the societal structures that we have at the moment, that there are on the other hand also enough people that in change can be creative, present, and further new developments that will help us to create different society. So I think that's the hope for now.
Beautiful, man. All right, where do I begin with that? There's a lot of great things you said. The first thing that made me think about was being stuck in the fear state. So back in the day when there's a saber-toothed tiger, we look and there's a saber-toothed tiger, and then we got to remember that we got to watch out for that thing. But what's happening now, and I guess animals, they go into the fight or flight, and then they stop. Once the danger is done and the deer runs away or whatever, then they go back into a natural state. And what I think that's happening collectively is we're stuck in a fear state. And if you kind of just take a little bit of a mental inventory of what you're receiving each day as far as input, and you kind of divide it between like the fear that's being projected onto you around culture, TV, and this counts for the TV shows you watch that are entertainment, whether people are getting murdered in it and things like that. We wake up and we have our bodies here as its own intelligence, and it's looking around and all the external things, your TV, which it's not really registering, is not real, is creating these sensors and these activations in the body. And it's like, holy shit, man, you got to watch out because outside is dangerous. You got to watch out for your neighbor. And I think that we're perpetually stuck there, and we can't get into our natural state, which is coherence, which is imagination, which is building, which is self-exploration, which could even lead to exploring the stars. But you have to first not be afraid of your neighbor. And when we're talking about the collective consciousness, Roger Nelson was on the podcast from the Global Consciousness Institute, and Dean Radin's going to come on actually next week, I think. And they were just measuring global consciousness as how a collective of people can influence are connected through random number generators, which is really fascinating. And then when you're talking about AI as a reflection, where we always project the issue onto AI, Mo Gaudat, who is the former chief business officer at Google X, is now on a mission to do 1 billion happy. And, he talks about AI very specifically in his videos, saying, look, if this AI is learning from us, we need to figure this out, because what is it learning? And this is a very critical point in human history, I think, individually and collectively. So the question that I kind of wanted to pose was, do you, going down the science route into all these different avenues, have you seen studies, or are there certain research that you've seen that give you hope for humanity moving in a more positive direction? Are you more hopeful for where we can go? And, what are you most inspired about for, each individual, or what we're capable of as a humanity?
Yeah, first of all, you talking about fear, and I think there's maybe the healthy part of fear that makes us alert when there is a real danger. But in fact, for most of us, most of the moments that we are afraid of, there is no real danger. And so this, I think, should make us think and feel and contemplate, because it means that the movie of our past is so strong. It's like when you go to the cinema, you watch your movie and you're really into your movie, and then suddenly you have all kinds of advertisements overshadowing your main movie, and you hardly see your main movie. That's our psyche. Like, that's often fears of the past. So then you take a decision, you want to, I don't know, see your girlfriend or whatever, and then all kinds of emotions come up that actually are not related at all to now. They are the past. When the past is the stored energy of the past is kind of coming alive, like a virtual reality on top of your reality, like an augmented reality. Why we are so excited about augmented reality? Because we are living in it all the time. It's kind of, that's our state. And so I think we need good tools to work with this stuff. And we need to be equipped to learn to clear in our nervous systems, like all the storage of fear that is childhood related, that is kind of like related through all the conditioning in culture. And we need good tools, simple tools and good tools to clear our bodies and our nervous systems from all those layers of fears in order to become a present human being. And presence means that this moment is not being overshadowed by, like, through past movies. And then in presence, like, we can listen to the emergence of the real future, because in the mystical traditions we say the past is not what happened yesterday. The past is the residue that is still there from yesterday that keeps affecting my now. And the future is not necessarily tomorrow, because the unconscious past will repeat itself tomorrow. We all know how hard it is to just change one habit. Sometimes we come into the same fights with our partners, with other people. We repeat the same loops. And in order to change one loop is already a big thing. And if not, we just get triggered, the same place gets triggered, the same reaction comes out, it's kind of just a repetition. So tomorrow is not necessarily the future. Tomorrow is only the future when a new higher development happens, that updates the current development. Like, we need updates. And so, first of all, we need, in order to get out of the fear paralysis and the projection of fear, because it's good to be intuitively afraid if there's a real danger going down this road, but it's not so helpful to be all the time afraid if there is no danger and we are still afraid, because it freezes our creativity, it freezes our expression, our happiness, and we are less relating to people because there are many strangers and others. And that's a function of the past. It's not a function of now. And collaboration gets dimmed down by past movies. And so in order to have a global collaboration on many of the issues that we have, I think people who learn how to clear their own past become more present, and then they become more available to the real future. And the real future is inspiration, it's emergence, it's kind of innovation. Innovation is in the mystical practice, innovation is a capacity. That's something that we can learn. We can learn through spiritual practice to open our kind of future channels, our innovative channels. And so I think that's one thing. And the thing that, because you asked what I feel is positive, and I feel that God, or the divine force, or the force that creates the universe right now, is entirely positive. Because that's the innermost force of life, to live. And that's movement. And so when that original creativity is online, in our most essential moments and in our most creative moments, we get a taste of that force. And I think for all of us, in the real creative moments, we feel elevated, we feel like in our movement, we feel excited, we feel present. And in our most essential moments, we are also, like, everybody recognizes an essential moment. Why? Because that's very close to the original essence of life. And so when we have an essential moment, something is changing, something is moving forward, something gets realized. There's a deep insight. Like in a relationship, suddenly we have a breakthrough and we come closer, or we, at work, we suddenly have a breakthrough and something moves forward. Everybody remembers essential moments, and they have the perfume of the original creativity. And so even if people are often allergic to the word God because it's related to religious setups, but the divine force is the original universal creativity, like the creation process, is inherently positive. And I believe if we lose the connection to it, if we get more and more disembodied, and if we get more and more kind of lost in our sensory perception, then we often lose the meaning. But if we feel connected and creative, in a creative moment, you always have meaning. You always feel positive. And I think that's what we have to cultivate as a culture, to support each other, to be reconnected. And I believe there is the biggest, let's say, hopeful quality, because not only does it feel good when we are co-creative, and when we, every inspirational conversation, you leave it and you feel your neurons are gleaming. Like you feel, wow, what an inspiring conversation. You have many ideas, you feel good, you feel elevated. And not only does it feel good, like the creative eros feels good, but the creative eros makes us also as humanity very creative to solve the issues that we have. So if we support each other to be creative, we can trust each other that we take care of the issues that we meet. And you meet other issues than I do, but you can trust that I will give my best to take care of the ones that I meet, and vice versa. And like this, we create a human orchestra where we want to play. And so for people that feel they are living the life that they want to live, they wake up in the morning with a yes. You wake up in the morning, you're excited. You're excited to go into your day because you love what you do. You love, and even if there are challenges, even people that love what they do, they will have challenges. But you have enough inner power to meet it. But if you wake up already with a, I don't know, and with a doubt, so then that's where we need to create cultures to support each other, to clarify what are we here for? What is my mission? Where's my creativity? And to support each other to get this online. And I think that's the most hopeful, when we are connected to that place. And I think in science, like science in a way supports more and more anyway, thing like mindfulness, like we know thousands of years people meditate and it's good for them. Now that neuroscience has some kind of scientific papers, it's also on Time magazine, and now many people practice mindfulness. But mindfulness was good for a long time. And so like science helps us to get the kind of the stamp of our time, that it's a kosher stamp in a way. It's kind of, it tells us, wow, it's right. But anyway, we already feel all the things that are right, and being a loving, compassionate, inspired, creative human being is good, whether science is saying yes to it or not. I mean, it's kind of, we feel it. And I think, but the latest scientific papers show us many things that the wisdom traditions also said already for a long time. Especially also the transgenerational trauma transmission, I think is a very important part, and how this affects our health and our societies. And I think if we are more and more of us that are willing to really like look at our past in order to integrate it, this will clear all those movies that we project onto our day and other people, and this will create more and more healthy intimacy in the terms of healthy relationships around us. Yeah.
Just beautiful again, man. I was trying to find a new word. I was like, nah, I'm just going to go with that word. That's the word for it. You touched on a lot of really great things there. Where I wanted to go with it is several different directions, because I think it's important, the understanding of God. I like to use the word allergic to it. I thought that was hilarious. And we are, and I was as a kid when I started to kind of look into it, because I just looked and, some of it didn't make any sense to me, right? It's like, oh, all of my good friends that aren't Christians are going to burn in hell for all of eternity. I was like, crap. I was like, these are good people. I love these people. I don't want them to burn in all eternity. Something here is not computing. And then, just like your football team, New York Yankees or the Dodgers, or if you're in Europe, it's going to be a football team, right? In Germany, the World Cup's nuts, right? You got these little pockets of different language, different cultures, different histories, just different everything. And so we become allergic to God, which is the force, that divine force, that thing that's creating all life, that's beyond you and your, I call it like the dumb brain. You don't know anything compared to the intelligence that's growing the trees and figuring everything out and creating life and the magic in the body. You don't know anything in your book and your idea of what God is. And so then it came up for me, is like, for me, the experience of God or spirit is a direct experience. And I've had those, and they're really awesome. And then you have this connection that can kind of go beyond, like the teachings are good, they're great, but they're in the mind. And so many people are really skeptical to come into anything spiritual or religious or new age, because it's like, it starts in the mind. They don't know if they're going to get a direct experience. So I was curious if you wanted to touch on, maybe for you, some things that you've done, and like, how do you create a closer connection with that spirit, so it's a real tangible experience that you can have as an individual. And then the second part that I didn't want to forget about is, you talked about useful tools for dealing with this kind of thing. And I was just curious if you could share maybe one or two of your best tools, so people can have them in their bag as they go about their daily life, because it's a great conversation, but most people on this line are probably got kids at home, or they're listening, or they got these problems, and they got to do their to-do list, and they're at the gym jogging and trying to get some of this stuff in while they go, kind of like, we deal with life. I just imagine that little guy with the hammer trying to get his that comic where he's like digging underneath, and that's like life, just dealing with crap all day, trying to get to this meaningful part. So that's my rant. You can go with that. We'll start there.
Good. Yeah, first of all, it's true that there are many books out there about all kinds of spiritual teachings and practices, and I believe, like, meeting people that really rest in a deeper spiritual connection or awareness, that's the way that for many people, because for the ones that it hits cosmically, or that it happens in their life, no matter if they do a practice or not, no matter what they do, it happens to them anyway. So whatever they're going to do, it's going to happen for them. It's kind of a cosmic lottery. Suddenly, boom, there it is. And there are some people that never heard anything about spiritual practice, and they suddenly have an opening in their consciousness, and they don't even know what happened to them. Sometimes they are very disoriented because they don't know, wow, like something happened, and they didn't take drugs, they didn't do anything. They one day wake up, and there are people like it. And then sometimes even it takes them years to find somebody that can help them to figure out what that is. And but for many people, when we start, because when somebody already has a yearning, you're already connected to the echo of your future development. You're already connected to something that calls you. Once you're interested in reading a book, or listening to a talk, or doing whatever you're doing, there is already kind of a magnetism. Otherwise, you you wouldn't do what you do. And so once there is a calling, there is already inside a part of us that is awake enough to look, to search, to read, to listen, to discover. And so when this part on the inside needs like an equivalent representation on the outside. So if somebody wants to study design, and then you go to the university and then you study design with people that already manifested design in their energy, they already crystallized in their energy in design. So that's why I think university teachings are great, but learning from real masters, I don't know, in medicine, in design, in philosophy, in any kind of discipline is really important, because you can learn from the crystallized, somebody that dealt with it for 40 years has it in every cell. So real knowledge is not just mental knowledge. Knowledge is embodied knowledge. It sits in every cell of that person, because the person gave his or her whole life to do what they do. Or great musicians or artists, they are saturated. The music lives in their cells. When you just spend time with them, it like your cells learn from their cells. It's kind of a transmission. And the same is also true for like the spiritual practice. When we find people that are deeply immersed in a deeper state, when you spend time with them, it's a kind of a transmission. It's like a radio station that sends out this kind of radio program. And if you have the right receiver, which is interest, the receiver is always interest. So the receiver kind of can listen to that radio program and get nourished by it. And that's why I think one real discernment is when we listen to teachings, if we can get a transmission. Because many people also teach from a mental state, as also in the spiritual world. There are many things that people read a lot of books and then they teach, but it's not their deep experience. They don't sit in it. They just know it. And that's great, but that's not yet what induces it, as you said, the spiritual, the deeper place that is kind of awake is a direct transmission. That's something that you get in your consciousness. It's not, you don't get it in your mind. Like we can have many ideas, but this you can read in a book. But when you meet a teacher, or when you meet a teaching, it's kind of that you can learn from the transmission. That's the real thing. And so I also think that the true teaching is kind of like an awakening in all of us, like in all parts of us, of ourselves. And it's kind of like the nervous system, the body, the emotional system, also the mind and our being gets nourished because there's interest and there is the kind of the deep embodied experience, and both together can create a meaningful partnership. And as you said, I think that this kind of divine force is really important, because even often in the mindfulness teachings, which are beautiful and very important, like grace and the blessing and the bowing and humility. And so these are very important, and the creative force, that consciousness is not just stillness, consciousness is also creation, and that both together are not two. Like at the beginning of the Bible, at the beginning was the word, and later on is the word says light. So that consciousness and light are not two. We're not talking about light, it's the creation of light. And so it's not two, it's direct. And in our world, we often talk about things. That's why authenticity is also, somebody who walks his or her talk is also the one where the word and the action and the energy is the same. So authenticity is when you get one message, what the person says is what is really in the person right now. That's direct experience. But because we are used to a fragmented world, and even our parents often told us A, but they felt B. So this creates a kind of, the child doesn't know, should I trust what I feel or should I trust what I hear? So you get these double messages, and then you develop your own split inside. And for many people to heal that split and to come back to this authenticity, that what I say and what I feel is the same. And that's, I think, what's very healing. And that's also what's very direct. And to your second question with the practices, I think that what I see as one of the biggest dangers at the moment in the world is that the degree of disembodiment, if that partners up with high tech, I think we're gonna have a problem. Because when we are less regulated, when we don't feel ourselves, when we are too stuck in our minds, and that's the platform to create and use technology from, I think that's dangerous, because then we do things that we don't feel, and if we don't feel, we care less. And many of the computer games, as you said, also many of the TV programs are actually meant to, like, not meant to, but they easily get us into a dissociated state, that we are overwhelmed. I think for many of us, even reading the news, if you're really honest, when you hear about a terror attack or a school shooting, we hardly can feel what that means. So we can know about it mentally, but we cannot emotionally and physically participate in that moment when we read it, because it's too overwhelming. And if we really allow it in, it's so much. Like, it's really so much. And so we are already natural, and dissociation is a very important function in the nervous system. Many children survived because they could dissociate. And so when we now exposed to so much information, the dissociation and disembodiment is already kind of, that's so common in the world. And if this partners up with technology, I think we can build technology and also use technology that is not connected to who we are. It's kind of disconnected. And I think we really have to take care of this, because on the one side, it can create many health issues and psychological issues because it's not regulated well. I don't feel anymore when it's too much. So then I overdo it, I overuse it. I play games that actually get me constantly into disassociated, very stressed states. And then if I don't feel, I also care less. I care less about the world, about other people, about my own kids, about, because I don't feel. And feeling doesn't mean only emotions. Feeling means that when we talk right now, that I feel you and you feel me, just here online. That's feeling. We feel the world. And that's why I think a great practice is also, first of all, that we understand fear. Fear, many people say, oh, fear blocks me. Where in fact, we learn very early on, because often we got overwhelmed, that we blocked the fear. Because we don't want to feel fear, we contract. We do something in order to not feel. And so usually when people say fear blocks me, actually it's the other way around. I block my fear. That's why I feel stuck, because I don't want to feel afraid. So the intensity of fear is something that we need to slowly re-own, that I'm willing to more and more feel feelings, not suppress feelings. But then for some people that are really traumatized, that's overwhelming. So then we need to find, okay, what is actually, like when there's only ice and water, like it's easy to drown. So for some people, they really drown in their feelings because they're too overwhelming. So we need to build land. We need to build an island and make it bigger and bigger and bigger in order to stand on solid ground. And so our body is a great resource, because when I'm really overwhelmed by my feelings, I can say, okay, where can I feel my body? Where can I trust my body? Where can I feel energy flowing through my body, being alive in my body, feeling like stability in my body? And then from that stability, I can meet my feelings. And the second thing is that relation. When I tell you that I'm afraid and you listen to me, you give me you add to my own strength. So relation is another very important resource. So that I say, many people try to manage their feelings on their own, whereas just having somebody compassionately listening to me already helps me to digest my feelings more. So relation and also self-contact are two very important resources. And then, of course, people who have a spiritual practice and become already more present in themselves have another resource. And the other thing I believe to understand is that feelings are the basis, emotions, no, not feelings, let's call it emotions. Emotions are the basis of relation. Because of emotions, we care. And so fear, when we look at the nature of fear, many people think that fear has something to do with separation. Whereas when we look at the nature of fear, what is the original fear that we feel? Is that fear gets children back to their parents. So fear is a relational emotion. It says when the child gets scared, so the child crawls away, then it's already too far away. It gets scared, and it runs back to the mama or to dad, but then dad and mom become boring, and then fear switches into curiosity, and curiosity, they go out again. So there is a pendulum movement to go out and to come back, and fear brings us back. So evolutionary wise, it's a very intelligent process, because it says that when kids get afraid, they should come back to their parents, because there they are safe. And so parents are supposed to protect their children, and children by evolution come back to their parents in a healthy sense. So when a child is too young, it cannot process all the fear alone. The nervous system is not ready. So it needs the nervous system of the parent to connect, to relax, and then to get curious again. And for many of us, that function, often parents are not available, they are busy, they're whatever. So the coming back was hard. Or my parents also traumatized. So then when I connect to my parents, they don't feel me. And then I also stay alone with my fear. So for many of us, fear, which was originally an emotion of connection and coming back to safety, we learned to hold too early our fear. So then we walk through life and we are constantly afraid now, as this is the after effect. But if we bring our fears into connection, like if you tell a friend or if you tell somebody that is close to you, that you trust, then the connection can be a relaxation of the fear, and you can learn to digest it. So for many people, the reflex would be to hold it ourselves and not to share it, because sometimes we're even ashamed when we talk about it. But actually sharing it is a very important aspect of digesting it. And that's why one practice is presencing through my body. If I can stay with fear, slowly I can clear fear out of my energy. So that's, if I can train this, that's great. But sometimes I need somebody to talk to that gives me kind of like a presence and a listening in order to digest my own fear. And if I feel that it's too strong for me, then I need to see a professional and work through it with somebody, until I can deal with it by myself. But that we see that our emotions are actually wonderful. Emotions are wonderful qualities in us. And if emotions are healthily integrated, they create a warm, loving human being. Somebody that can be a great parent, because we care and we feel our kids, and can be a great lover and a great intimate partner and a great leader of a team or a company, because the warmth of our own emotional field will invite other people to trust us. Because if you feel emotionally met, you trust. That creates trust and a healthy network of relations. So emotions are very important, but the work with emotions is also very important. Yeah.
Amazing. I agree with all that. And the last point that you made, I just made an Instagram post pretty deep about a native elder that I'm studying with. And he just talked about sun and heat, and that you wanted to be heat. You want to be heat for others so you can light their fire, essentially. And I went into that. But that's the idea, is you can feel it. And when you talk about, people who are embodied that you've been around, it resonates in their cells. When I was training in China with the Shaolin masters, it was very obvious that they weren't kidding around. So I think it's really important to, seek those people, and you can feel it. And I think the last point with emotion is very important and powerful, because that's culturally what we're dealing with a little bit with the way that we're navigating our life. Men might be taught to, not be emotional and be tough and be strong. Then you've got video games to disassociate. And then you can mask your emotions through habits, through eating, through all these different things, because we're not really taught how to process them and how to get the information that the body as the intelligent system is trying to tell us. And it's our guidepost. If we walk into a situation and we're really afraid, and we actually should be, then we can be intuitive. But if you're going around and navigating and things are off, people can be stressed out for literally years of their life and just disregard that emotion. They're just like, nah, I'm just going to choose this existence. I'm just going to walk around at like level 80 of stress, or level 90 or level 100. And then some people are like, you know what? I'm going to walk around my daily life with like 0 to 10 level of stress. And it'll take some understanding of emotional intelligence and how to work through that. But, we're not taught that. And so many people are walking around with level 90 depression, level 90 anxiety, level 90 fear. And they're not even listening to that signal that's coming from themselves, because they don't know how to go through it. So I think it's a really important point, and really great about, just looking into it. Some people call it shadow work. You can get a guide. You can just do a little bit of reading, but ultimately just put the mirror back and just ask yourself, where is this coming from? Is this true? And just start a bit of a self-inquiry. Get a journal and start writing it down. And now you're going to start make some headway. And if you want some help, get some help. But I think you nailed it on the head there, because culturally we're not doing that. If anything, culturally, it's like, you got to numb that. Don't worry about that. Don't worry about what the body's telling you. It doesn't know anything. It doesn't sense like, the unconscious mind of like everything around you. It's not super powerful and amazing. Just like, disregard it. So it's ridiculous. But I want to ask you, because we only have a little bit of time left. This is a bit of a different question that came up for me, so I'm going to just ask it. But what for you is the most fun, amazing, or awe-inspiring, magical thing about being alive?
The most fun, amazing. I mean, there are few things. The most amazing, inspiring thing is when I feel like this deep connection flowing through my being. Like often when I teach, or when I give groups or workshops, or when we have very deep, intimate, like healing moments, there's a moment of kind of like a sacred moment when something deep heals in somebody. It's very interesting. It's like the whole room, there can be hundreds of people, it's completely quiet. It's like as if everybody gets that this moment is special, like something really changed for somebody's life. And so one very amazing, beautiful part of life for me is this kind of when in groups or in whatever we spaces, when suddenly there is this moment of very high group presence, and you feel that everybody is there for like one person sharing something that happens in the room, and there's a very high level of presence, and that these moments, they're kind of sacred, and I think every time kind of this sacred, inspiring, creative feeling is in the room, that's one of the most fun or most most beautiful moments in life, where all the time, all the times, the past, present, and the future are happening now. Like in highly present moments, that all of life is here right now. That's true presence. Like that, all that was, all that ever will be, is here right now. and it lines up for this moment to be exactly the way it is. And in high coherence moments, that's what makes the moment be that moment, like be a sacred moment, because everything's included in this shift or in this click that is happening right now. So that's, I think, number one. And also what I love very much is to be with my family and my daughter, like the moments where there's this kind of intimacy, this beautiful moments of joy, fun, creativity, and like closeness. So that's also definitely a very beautiful part, like also kind of beautiful moments of joy that are happening in this love, in this human love that is there. And and maybe also like I think one of the deep moments that I know are the moments when a true seeing happens. Like when two people or one person or two people see each other so deeply that you know, like that's something that you're gonna remember forever. Like that you felt seen into the core of your being. And you know, of daily interactions are often more on the surface, but sometimes you either get seen or you see somebody else in such a depth that it feels it's exactly as you said before, it's direct. It's not anymore indirect. It's not that I look at somebody out there. It's kind of a moment of deep intimacy. But I'm not talking about sexual intimacy only. I'm talking about like human, like deep seeing. And I think that's also a gift that we can give each other. Every time that happens, it's just beautiful. There's just beauty because you see the beauty of everybody in a way. Like you see the deepest beauty of a human being's life or intelligence. So that's also something that makes me deeply happy.
Awesome. Beautiful, man. Well, I see the first one and the other two, but specifically the first one as a result of your work, you know, kind of being in the flow and knowing it's like this force or presence or experience that just goes beyond your everyday. It's this all inclusive you and everybody, and also God force spirit or whatever. And it's very tangible. And so I think it's a beautiful testament to your work and walking the path and what you're doing. And anybody, it doesn't matter what it is. It could be, you know, carpentry, it could be music, it could be being a doctor, it could be whatever it is. But when you follow your calling and you're doing that, there's going to be these moments where you get that experience, and that's that force, and you're aligned with who you are. You know, I often say if you're in the forest and if you're a beaver being a beaver, you're going to get those moments where everything, you know, you might be swimming with the current and you use your little tail and you pop out, do something epic like a dolphin. I don't friggin' know. But if you're doing the things that beavers don't like and you're trying to, you know, run like a deer, you're a fat little pudgy hog. It's not going to be great. It's going to be a little bit rougher, and source might try to guide you back to something that's a little bit more natural. Just getting off a tangent, but it's been a pleasure to talk to you. I'm grateful for you to give me this time. So before we go, I know that you got a little bit of a time thing, but anything that you wanted to say or that you wish that I had asked, or just any closing thoughts for the listeners?
First of all, I very much appreciate your own like depth of inquiry and your program and all the people that you reach with it. And I really like the depth of your own study. I mean, I just get to know you now on this call. We never talked before, and but I really enjoy the beauty of your openness, your inquiry, and that you really, it's very meaningful to you, and it feels to me like very authentic. So that it's a kind of part of your mission in this life, and I really enjoy meeting you here, and I enjoy the depth of your questions. They're very thoughtful. So that's what I want to say, and also that, like, I think what we are talking about here now, and what you most probably talk with many other people about, is like that there everybody who really wants to go to find that kind of inner path that you talked about. So what's really my path in life is stop copying other people's path, but really listen to oneself and learn from others. I think it's important to learn from others, but really to use the learning to develop one's own kind of expression of it. And I think that everybody who really wants to walk this path, like all the information that we need is here. And if we listen to the interest, which is the kind of the basic blueprint of the receiver, like we will receive the radio programs that nourish our kind of soul's journey. And so that's the encouraging part, that I think for everybody who really wants to find deeper answers or a deeper part of ourselves, it's available, and that's very exciting. And I think your program gives the opportunity to many people to get in touch with different expressions of it and with your expression. So thank you so much for this and for your work.
Thank you, brother. Right back at you. Yeah, man. Deep appreciation for you walking the path for a long time. So I really appreciate that, because it's easy to do it meditate for a day, a week, a year, but over time you get that resonance, and you definitely have that cellular resonance. I can feel it. So I appreciate you doing it and sharing everything that you're up to. Hopefully I'll see you in New York, but definitely stay in touch. And thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you.
See everybody.
Bye-bye.